The neighborhood of Cedar Grove was the kind of place that prided itself on order. Every lawn was a carefully manicured canvas of emerald green, every mailbox perfectly aligned, and every house painted within a precise palette of beige, taupe, and muted pastels. It was the kind of neighborhood where residents greeted each other with polite nods during morning walks, and where the Homeowners Association wielded its power like a benevolent but strict king. Yet beneath this veneer of suburban serenity, tensions simmered like coals waiting for a spark. At the center of this brewing storm lived the Morris family. Their house, a two-story colonial with white trim and deep blue shutters, sat on a corner lot with a sweeping view of the cul-de-sac. It was immaculate by most standards: trimmed hedges, a newly sealed driveway, and flowers in full bloom. But to the HOA, it was an anomaly, a house that did not conform. The Morris family had been in the neighborhood for a decade, quietly navigating the rules and the politics, never imagining that their neighborly interactions would escalate into a full-blown war. The source of the tension was Helen Whitaker, the president of the Cedar Grove Homeowners Association, a woman whose reputation was as polished as the silverware in her dining room. Helen was meticulous, formidable, and unyielding when it came to HOA regulations. She had a way of making every minor infraction feel like a personal affront. A mailbox slightly crooked? Grounds for a warning. Lawn edged at the wrong angle? Immediate violation. And while most residents viewed her as a strict but fair enforcer of the community's rules, there were whispers, hushed conversations, about the extreme lengths she could go to when she felt her authority was challenged. It began with small annoyances. A potted plant slightly off-center on the Morris porch drew an official letter. A basketball hoop, temporarily placed for the weekend, became a citation. Each notice was polite in wording but sharp in implication. Compliance was expected, and deviation would not be tolerated. The Morris family, initially amused, started to feel the pressure. The letters piled up, each one carrying an escalating tone. Yet no one could have predicted the disaster that would follow. The night it happened, the neighborhood was quiet. The crickets hummed in the hedges, and the occasional passing car was the only disturbance. The Morris family had retired early, unaware of the danger creeping through the shadows. Helen Whitaker, whose reputation as the neighborhood enforcer had never been questioned, had been watching. Her vigilant eye, always alert to perceived slights, now moved beyond letters and warnings. There was a fire she would ignite that would consume not just property, but the fragile sense of security that the Morris family had long taken for granted. By the time the flames were noticed, it was too late. The fire spread with a ferocity that seemed almost deliberate, consuming the wooden panels and dry roofing with unnatural speed. Neighbors called the fire department, rushing out in bathrobes and slippers, their expressions a mixture of shock and fear. The Morris family watched from the street, helpless, as years of memories turned to ash. Family photos, heirlooms, furniture, all gone in a conflagration that seemed almost surgical in its destruction. The firemen worked tirelessly, but the house, once a symbol of stability and warmth, became a skeleton of smoldering ruins by the time the flames were extinguished. In the aftermath, the neighborhood was stunned. People whispered behind fences and in driveways, recounting what little they knew, piecing together fragments of surveillance footage and eyewitness accounts. There was a pervasive sense of disbelief. The thought that someone from within the community, someone entrusted with maintaining order, could orchestrate such a catastrophe seemed unthinkable. Helen Whitaker, however, maintained her composure. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, betrayed nothing as she walked the streets in the days that followed. Clipboard in hand, inspecting each property with the same meticulous scrutiny as before, as if nothing had happened. For the Morris family, the psychological toll was immediate and suffocating. Insurance claims, temporary housing, and the endless bureaucratic shuffle occupied their days. But the fear and suspicion lingered like a shadow. They could not escape the feeling that Helen's presence was a constant, looming threat. Every knock at the door, every sudden sound in the night, carried the weight of paranoia. They knew that in a neighborhood like Cedar Grove, where appearances mattered more than truth, one wrong step could trigger another round of punitive action. The Morris family, already devastated by the fire, now faced the unnerving reality that the person responsible was not an external criminal, but someone intimately familiar with their lives, their schedules, and their vulnerabilities. Local news covered the fire extensively, framing it as a tragic accident at first. But the story quickly evolved. Social media erupted with speculation, fueled by shaky video clips and half-verified reports. The narrative that Helen Whitaker might have been involved gained traction. Residents, previously obedient and deferential, began to gossip more openly. The HOA's authority, once unquestioned, started to fracture under the weight of suspicion. For Helen, this was a calculated risk. Her ambition and need for control had always overshadowed conventional boundaries. Yet even she could not have anticipated how far the consequences would ripple through the neighborhood, affecting not just the Morris family, but the entire community's sense of security and trust. Investigators arrived, combing through debris and interviewing neighbors. Every charred beam and melted fixture was scrutinized, each detail cataloged meticulously. The Morris family watched from behind police tape, their grief compounded by a creeping realization. The destruction of their home was not just an attack on property. It was an assault on their sense of agency, on their ability to feel safe in the place they had called home for over a decade. Meanwhile, Helen Whitaker maintained her public image of concern, offering vague condolences in interviews, her tone measured and controlled, as though the fire were an unfortunate misfortune rather than a deliberate act. By the end of the first week, Cedar Grove was divided. Some residents defended Helen, citing her long history of service and her dedication to maintaining property standards. Others whispered openly about the possibility of arson, citing past conflicts and her unyielding temperament. The Morris family, caught in the center of this maelstrom, began to prepare for the legal battle they knew was inevitable. Little did they realize, the fire was only the beginning, a prelude to a far more dramatic and surreal confrontation that would bring them face to face with Helen Whitaker in a setting no one could have predicted. The neighborhood remained quiet that night, but the echoes of the fire lingered. Cedar Grove would never be the same, and the Morris family would soon discover that in this community, the rules extended far beyond lawns and mailboxes. In the weeks to come, the drama that had begun with a single spark would escalate, exposing secrets, ambitions, and vendettas that had long simmered beneath the surface. And as the Morris family braced for what lay ahead, they had no idea that the next chapter of their ordeal would unfold in a place they never imagined, a courtroom. In the wake of the Morris family's house burning to the ground, the neighborhood of Cedar Grove remained suspended in a strange mixture of grief, fear, and curiosity. What had once been casual weekend chatter about landscaping choices now became hushed speculation about arson, HOA power, and the lengths to which Helen Whitaker might go to maintain control. Yet, while gossip thrived in the streets and social media feeds, the Morris family moved into the relentless grind of legal procedures, slowly realizing that fighting Helen Whitaker would require navigating a labyrinth more treacherous than the flames that had consumed their home. The legal process began with a claim filed through the insurance company, but it quickly became entangled with suspicions of intentional misconduct. Insurance investigators were meticulous, examining every photograph, every scrap of evidence, and every statement from neighbors. They reconstructed the night of the fire, analyzing wind patterns, accelerant residues, and fire progression. What should have been a straightforward claim became a tangled web of inquiries when patterns emerged that suggested human interference, intentional ignition rather than accident. Meanwhile, The Morris family began to document Helen Whitaker's past behavior. Letters from the HOA, past complaints, and even old surveillance footage from neighborhood cameras were compiled into a growing dossier. Each document revealed a pattern of authoritarian enforcement. Letters that escalated for minor infractions, fines issued without clear explanation, and relentless inspections that left neighbors feeling scrutinized and powerless. To outsiders, these might have seemed trivial, but within the Morris family, the evidence painted a portrait of obsession and control. Cedar Grove itself became a theater of tension. Neighbors started to choose sides, albeit quietly. Some expressed sympathy for the Morris family, discreetly offering support in ways small and subtle. A bag of groceries left at the temporary housing, an offer to water plants, an expression of concern during a walk. Others remained steadfast in their loyalty to Helen, defending her actions as necessary to maintain the order and aesthetic of the neighborhood. The division created a charged atmosphere, one that made every interaction fraught with suspicion. Even mundane errands like retrieving mail or taking out the trash became exercises in careful observation. In the meantime, Helen Whitaker's public demeanor remained impeccable. She attended HOA meetings with the same precise formality as before, clipboard in hand, but the underlying tension was palpable. She exuded confidence, bordering on arrogance, as though she could intimidate the legal system itself through sheer presence. Residents who observed her from across the room noticed the cold calculation behind her polite smile. A woman who understood that power often resided not in what one did, but in what one could make others fear. For the Morris family, the stress of relocation compounded the situation. Living in temporary housing, far smaller and far less comfortable than their destroyed home, they felt the tangible weight of loss every day. The smallest reminders of what had been taken, the corner of a rug, a faded photograph, the lingering scent of a fireplace that no longer existed, became symbols of violation and injustice. Each day was punctuated by phone calls, emails, and meetings with attorneys who warned them of the difficulty of proving intentional wrongdoing, especially against someone with Helen's reputation and social standing. The legal strategy took shape slowly. Their attorneys advised them to document everything meticulously: conversations, interactions, notices, and neighborhood gossip that might indicate motive. They began requesting official HOA records, past correspondence, and any evidence of complaints filed against Helen. The process was painstaking, involving hours of combing through minute details, creating timelines, and connecting seemingly innocuous dots. For the Morris family, it felt like digging through rubble in search of something that might rebuild their lives, not just materially, but psychologically. Word of the legal battle began to spread beyond Cedar Grove. Social media groups dedicated to HOA drama picked up the story, framing it in sensational terms. HOA president allegedly burns neighbor's house, and Karen gone wild in suburban showdown. Videos dissecting past HOA meetings, surveillance clips of neighborhood disputes, and speculative animations of the fire circulated widely. The Morris family found themselves suddenly in the spotlight, their personal tragedy amplified by online audiences eager for scandal. The exposure brought a strange mixture of validation and discomfort. They were no longer invisible victims, but unwilling participants in a community-wide spectacle. Then came the first signs of escalation. Helen Whitaker began her own campaign, filing countersuits, claiming slander, and asserting that any accusations against her were defamatory. Her legal team was aggressive, and the letters they sent were precise, intimidating, and almost surgical in tone. The Morris family read them in disbelief, realizing that the very person they had feared had not only survived scrutiny, but seemed poised to turn the legal system itself into a weapon. Each letter felt like another layer of fire, threatening to consume the remnants of their peace and resolve. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood became a pressure cooker. HOA meetings, once predictable and mundane, transformed into tense standoffs. Residents attended with nervous curiosity, observing interactions and anticipating conflict. Some whispered openly about Helen's behavior, while others avoided her entirely, fearful of retribution. The Morris family, once just another household in Cedar Grove, became a symbol of resistance to unchecked power. Yet the victory of symbolism offered little comfort in the face of mounting legal pressure, the weight of financial uncertainty, and the psychological toll of constant vigilance. The culmination of this slow-burning conflict arrived in the form of the courtroom summons. The notice was crisp, official, and chilling in its finality. The Morris family stared at it for hours, understanding fully that the moment had come when all strategies, all documentation, and all painstaking preparation would be tested. This was the stage upon which the months of tension, suspicion, and meticulous observation would collide. As they arrived at the courthouse, the air seemed thick with anticipation. Cameras from local news outlets snapped photos, reporters whispered to each other in corners, and residents of Cedar Grove filed in and out, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and disbelief. And then, like a storm breaking over a fragile landscape, Helen Whitaker appeared. She entered the courtroom with the same calm precision she exhibited in HOA meetings, but there was an unmistakable aura of calculated dominance. She carried herself as someone fully confident that the system would bend to her favor, unaware that the Morris family had spent months turning every perceived weakness into potential leverage. In that moment, the fire that had destroyed a home months ago was transformed into a metaphorical blaze of confrontation. The courtroom would serve as the stage for a drama that had begun in letters and inspections, escalated through suspicion and destruction, and now threatened to reach a climax that none of Cedar Grove's residents could have anticipated. The Morris family, poised on the edge of justice and retribution, understood that everything hinged on what would unfold in the days to come. And as the judge entered the room, the tension was palpable, the silence almost oppressive, the unspoken question hanging in the air. Who would emerge from this conflagration unscathed, and who would be left to watch the ashes settle? The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a place where formality cloaked the tension simmering just beneath the surface. For the Morris family, walking through its doors was like stepping into another world, one where the destruction of their home, the months of harassment, and the relentless scrutiny of Helen Whitaker would all be distilled into a series of legal maneuvers. The air was thick with anticipation, punctuated by the soft shuffle of papers and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Here, the battle that had begun with a single spark would ignite anew, and the consequences promised to be even more devastating than the fire itself. Helen Whitaker's entrance was calculated, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. She moved with the precision of a general, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Every eye in the courtroom turned toward her, recognizing the power she wielded not through physical force, but through the sheer audacity of her presence. To some, she appeared calm, dignified even. To others, the air of superiority and control was almost suffocating. The Morris family felt a chill at the sight of her, a reminder that this was no ordinary legal opponent. They were facing someone for whom rules were not just guidelines, but instruments to be wielded for personal dominance. The proceedings began slowly, with formalities that masked the undercurrent of hostility. Judges, clerks, and attorneys moved through their motions, but every glance, every gesture carried significance. Helen's legal team presented their initial arguments with rehearsed elegance, emphasizing procedural technicalities and the purported lack of concrete evidence. They portrayed the Morris family as overzealous accusers, desperate for compensation, and unwilling to accept the limitations of proof. To the casual observer, the arguments might have seemed dry or technical, but for those in the courtroom, every word was a weapon, and every pause a calculated strike. The Morris family's attorney countered with a meticulously prepared timeline, presenting evidence that suggested deliberate action rather than accident. Letters from the HOA, prior conflicts, and records of Helen's obsessive enforcement patterns were highlighted. Witnesses from the neighborhood testified, some hesitantly, some reluctantly, about Helen's past behavior, her public threats, and the chilling intensity of her scrutiny. Every detail, from minor infractions to personal vendettas, was framed as part of a larger pattern that culminated in the destruction of the Morris home. Yet Helen Whitaker remained unflinching. She observed the proceedings with an icy calm, occasionally exchanging brief, precise instructions with her legal team. She was everywhere at once in the courtroom, her gaze sharp, her posture impeccable, her aura suffocating. It became clear that Helen had transformed the legal arena into a theater of intimidation, and for the Morris family, the psychological weight of her presence threatened to rival the physical loss of their home. Every argument, every piece of evidence seemed to be measured against an invisible standard of her approval. As the trial progressed, unexpected twists began to emerge. Surveillance footage, initially dismissed as inconclusive, revealed a shadowy figure moving near the Morris property in the hours preceding the fire. While the image was grainy, the outline and mannerisms were startlingly familiar to those who had observed Helen's meticulous inspections of neighborhood properties. The Morris family felt a surge of hope tempered by dread. The implication was clear, but proving intent in court would be a labyrinthine challenge. Helen's defense, however, adapted with alarming speed. She introduced character witnesses, residents who spoke to her dedication to maintaining property standards, her tireless commitment to community aesthetics, and her seemingly selfless leadership. The testimony painted a stark contrast. Here was a woman of principle, wrongly accused by neighbors with grudges and imagination. For the Morris family, the courtroom felt like a battlefield tilted precariously, where evidence alone might not be enough to overcome the formidable force of reputation. Every day of the trial magnified the surreal tension. Cafeterias became war rooms where attorneys pored over deposition transcripts. Hallways were crowded with residents hoping to catch glimpses of the proceedings. News crews captured every development, framing the story with dramatic flair. The neighborhood watched from a distance, some offering subtle signs of support to the Morris family, others carefully curating social media posts defending Helen's conduct. Cedar Grove had transformed from a placid suburban enclave into a live spectacle of conflict, where personal vendettas, reputations, and the law collided in unpredictable ways. Then came the most astonishing twist of all. During a procedural recess, security cameras in the courthouse lobby captured a fleeting, almost cinematic moment. Helen Whitaker, confidently striding past reporters and spectators, paused to glance directly at the Morris family, her expression unreadable, then disappeared down a hallway. It was a gesture small in execution, but monumental in implication. Every eye in the courtroom seemed to sense it. The fire might have destroyed a home, but Helen's presence now threatened to consume the very notion of justice. For the Morris family, the sight was unsettling, a reminder that Helen's influence extended beyond paperwork and witness testimony. She had transformed her presence into a force that could dominate any space she entered. The trial's intensity escalated further when forensic experts presented evidence suggesting the presence of accelerants that were inconsistent with accidental ignition. Although circumstantial, the testimony added weight to the Morris family's claims. Yet Helen's legal team countered with equal precision, casting doubt on the methods, questioning chain of custody procedures, and highlighting alternative scenarios. The courtroom became a battleground of perception versus reality, of influence versus evidence, where the line between truth and narrative blurred with each passing hour. Outside the courthouse, the media amplified every moment. Short clips of Helen's entrance, the Morris family's emotional reactions, and the experts' dramatic demonstrations circulated online. The story became viral, framed in terms both sensational and personal. HOA President versus Homeowners, Fire, Fury, and the Law, read one headline. Public opinion swayed unpredictably, with commentators dissecting every detail, predicting outcomes, and speculating about motivations. The Morris family, once private citizens, now found themselves central characters in a drama that transcended the boundaries of their neighborhood. By the third week of proceedings, it was clear that the case was no longer just about insurance or property damage. It had become a psychological confrontation. Every appearance by Helen Whitaker, every glance, every measured step in the courtroom carried meaning, creating an atmosphere thick with tension and dread. The Morris family understood that they were not only fighting for restitution, they were fighting to reclaim their sense of safety, autonomy, and dignity. The fire had been devastating, but Helen's courtroom performance proved equally formidable, a reminder that some battles extended far beyond the physical destruction of property. As the chapter of the trial drew to its first significant climax, the Morris family realized that Cedar Grove had changed irrevocably. The neighborhood's obsession with perfection, order, and authority had reached a breaking point, exposing vulnerabilities and simmering resentments that had long been ignored. And as the judge prepared to hear final arguments for the day, all parties, legal teams, spectators, and the Morris family alike, felt the quiet, undeniable truth. The confrontation with Helen Whitaker was far from over, and the next twist in the story promised to be even more astonishing than the flames that had started it all. The courtroom had settled into a tense rhythm, the kind that feels like it stretches time itself. The Morris family sat at the plaintiff's table, their notebooks and folders stacked neatly, a fragile armor against the storm of Helen Whitaker's presence across the room. The air was charged, not with the odor of burning wood, but with anticipation, anxiety, and a gnawing sense of danger. Every person in the room seemed to hold their breath, as if acknowledging the weight of the drama that had already consumed months of lives. What had started as a suburban dispute over a crooked mailbox had escalated into something larger, more theatrical, and infinitely more personal. Helen Whitaker's strategy became apparent almost immediately. She didn't simply respond to accusations. She reshaped the courtroom itself into a stage, a theater where perception mattered more than evidence. Subtle gestures, a calm hand over her heart, a deliberate glance toward the jury, a momentary nod of acknowledgement to the judge, communicated control, authority, and self-assured innocence. It was a calculated dance, designed to assert dominance without uttering a word that could be legally contested. For the Morris family, it was unnerving. Every detail felt orchestrated, every movement precise, as if Helen were performing a role she had perfected over years of HOA power plays. Then came the twists. Witnesses who had initially supported the Morris family began to waver, their testimonies clouded by fear of reprisal. Anonymous calls and veiled threats emerged outside the courtroom, subtle enough to avoid legal detection, but potent in their intimidation. Some neighbors, previously sympathetic, quietly withdrew statements, leaving gaps in the narrative the Morris family had spent months constructing. The sense of betrayal was suffocating. Each day revealed how deeply Helen Whitaker had entrenched herself in the social fabric of Cedar Grove. Her influence, it seemed, extended beyond HOA letters and neighborhood inspections. It reached into the hearts of residents, compelling loyalty through subtle coercion. Amid the legal maneuvering, another layer of chaos emerged. Documents surfaced, emails, HOA reports, and meeting minutes, suggesting that Helen had orchestrated an intricate web of surveillance. Cameras in public spaces, strategic landscaping, and even neighborhood social events had been quietly monitored, their footage compiled into a dossier. The revelation stunned the Morris family's legal team. They were not merely fighting an arson claim. They were navigating a carefully constructed power network that had infiltrated every corner of the neighborhood. Every action, every conversation, and every movement had the potential to be recorded and repurposed, a weaponized archive of their private lives. The trial's climax in the courtroom began to feel surreal. Evidence of the accelerants used in the fire was presented with graphic detail, diagrams, and lab reports. The jury's attention was rapt, and the Morris family sensed a rare moment of hope. Yet Helen Whitaker's response was audacious. She argued, with impeccable logic and unwavering calm, that the evidence was circumstantial, that alternative explanations existed, and that intent could not be legally established. Her legal team executed a flawless counter-narrative, suggesting negligence, accidental ignition, and even environmental factors, all while maintaining an air of impartiality. It was a masterclass in deflection, manipulation, and courtroom theatrics. Social media became a parallel battleground. Clips of Helen's poised demeanor, combined with graphic depictions of the fire's aftermath, spread like wildfire. Comment sections became forums for debate, speculation, and outrage. Some labeled Helen a manipulative tyrant. Others called the Morris family opportunistic and litigious. The story transcended Cedar Grove, capturing the imagination of suburban homeowners and HOA watchers across the country. The Morris family, already under immense pressure, had to navigate not only the courtroom but also the court of public opinion, a trial amplified by viral narratives, gossip, and the unrelenting judgment of thousands of faceless observers. Then came the final, most shocking twist of all. Midway through the proceedings, an unexpected witness stepped forward. A former HOA board member who had resigned months earlier under mysterious circumstances. Their testimony was explosive. They described Helen's pattern of intimidation, her manipulation of community surveillance, and her willingness to escalate minor infractions into personal vendettas. They confirmed what the Morris family had long suspected. Helen had meticulously orchestrated campaigns against homeowners who defied her, using her position to assert absolute control. The courtroom fell silent as the witness recounted specific incidents, detailing threats, surveillance, and manipulations that went far beyond ordinary HOA behavior. The tension in the room became almost tangible. Every word of the testimony seemed to weigh heavily on the jury, on the Morris family, and on the observers. Helen Whitaker remained unflinching, her posture unchanged, her face a mask of calm. Yet even the most formidable actors cannot control every outcome. And for the first time, the Morris family sensed that the balance of power might be shifting. They felt the faint stirrings of vindication, a long-awaited acknowledgement that the months of destruction, fear, and meticulous documentation might finally have tangible impact. Even so, the ordeal was far from over. Helen's legal team immediately attempted to discredit the witness, questioning motives, memory, and timing. They portrayed the testimony as biased, anecdotal, and unreliable. It was a relentless onslaught, a reminder that in the courtroom, momentum is fragile, and perception is often as powerful as truth. The Morris family watched, hearts pounding, as every argument, every counterpoint, and every objection became a calculated maneuver in a psychological chess game, where a single misstep could unravel months of preparation. By the end of the day, the courtroom had transformed into a crucible of tension, reputation, and strategy. The Morris family left with mixed emotions, relief tempered by exhaustion, hope tempered by anxiety. Cedar Grove, too, was irrevocably changed. Residents whispered about the proceedings, took sides quietly, and watched for every update. The trial had exposed vulnerabilities, rivalries, and the hidden mechanics of power that Helen Whitaker had wielded for years. In its wake, the neighborhood was a powder keg, a community suspended between shock, fear, and anticipation of the final verdict. As the Morris family returned to their temporary housing that night, the weight of the journey pressed down. The fire that had destroyed their home was only the first act. The courtroom battle had revealed deeper layers of manipulation, ambition, and control. The next chapter promised the climax of this confrontation, where all the months of fear, preparation, and relentless pursuit of justice would converge in a verdict that could forever alter lives, reputations, and the very fabric of Cedar Grove. The stage was set. The pieces were in place, and as sleep eluded them, the Morris family understood one chilling truth. When Helen Whitaker played, the stakes were never small, and the next move could change everything. The morning of the verdict arrived like a heavy storm over Cedar Grove. The courthouse, a building usually associated with routine bureaucracy, now felt like a stage for an epic showdown. Residents, reporters, and legal teams filled the halls, the atmosphere tense with anticipation. For the Morris family, it was a culmination of months of terror, fear, and relentless effort. They had prepared meticulously, every shred of evidence catalogued, every testimony recounted in their minds, every hope tempered by the reality of Helen Whitaker's formidable presence. Helen arrived with her usual precision, her posture perfect, her expression a carefully controlled mask. But beneath the calm exterior was a calculated confidence. She had played her hand masterfully throughout the trial, turning surveillance footage, legal loopholes, and procedural technicalities into tools that amplified her authority. Every glance she cast in the courtroom carried the weight of challenge. Every subtle gesture was designed to remind those present who held power. Yet now, as the jury filed in and the judge prepared to announce the outcome, even Helen could not completely control the suspense that hung in the air. The jury had deliberated in near silence for hours, their faces carefully neutral, betraying nothing. When the judge called the room to order, it was as if time itself slowed. The Morris family gripped each other's hands, a physical tether to hold on to amidst the tension. The attorneys rose, papers shuffled, and the courtroom collectively leaned forward, waiting for the words that would determine whether months of devastation, anxiety, and meticulous documentation would be vindicated or dismissed. The verdict was read slowly, deliberately, with each word weighted and precise. For the Morris family, the initial seconds felt suspended in an almost surreal fog. Then came the declaration. The jury had found Helen Whitaker responsible for willful negligence that contributed to the fire, along with punitive damages meant to reflect the egregiousness of her actions. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Residents who had doubted, reporters who had speculated, and the Morris family who had endured months of fear, all felt the release of tension. A collective acknowledgement that justice, in some form, had been achieved. Yet the story did not end with the simple reading of the verdict. Helen Whitaker, even in the face of legal defeat, displayed an audacious resilience that stunned everyone. She remained seated, her expression unreadable, then slowly rose to deliver what became an unforgettable maneuver. A formal request for appeal, executed with flawless legal precision. While the Morris family celebrated, a quiet, unsettling understanding settled over them. Helen had lost the immediate battle, but she was far from finished. Her influence, cunning, and willingness to manipulate processes remained intact. The courtroom had awarded justice, but the war of wills was not yet over. Outside the courthouse, the aftermath was immediate and electric. News crews captured the Morris family's relief, the whispers among residents, and the astonishment of observers who had followed the story for months. Social media exploded with commentary. Hashtags circulated, clips were dissected, and every angle of Helen Whitaker's audacious courtroom demeanor was analyzed. The story had transcended Cedar Grove, becoming emblematic of the extremes of HOA power, neighborhood politics, and the human capacity for both control and resistance. The Morris family, once private citizens, had become symbols of resilience and defiance in the face of an overwhelming force. The weeks that followed were a mix of triumph, caution, and reconstruction. The Morris family began rebuilding their home, navigating insurance settlements, construction delays, and the emotional toll of recovery. Neighbors offered support in small but meaningful ways: flowers, tools, meals, and quiet companionship. Yet even amid reconstruction, the shadow of Helen Whitaker's audacity lingered. Her appeal loomed as a reminder that power, especially when wielded without regard for empathy, could never be entirely contained. The Morris family understood that vigilance, strategy, and unity were as critical to survival as legal victories. Helen herself became a study in paradox. To some, she remained an intimidating authority figure, a woman of influence who had been momentarily checked by a legal ruling, but who retained an aura of invincibility. To others, she had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that obsession with control, when untempered by conscience, could bring consequences that even meticulous planning could not entirely prevent. In Cedar Grove, residents observed her with a mixture of awe, fear, and fascination, knowing that she had permanently altered the social dynamics of their community. Yet the most profound change occurred within the Morris family. The trauma of the fire, combined with the months of intimidation and legal battles, had forged an unexpected strength. They had learned to navigate fear, to strategize under pressure, and to find resilience in moments of despair. Their restored home became a symbol, not just of rebuilding walls and roofs, but of reclaiming agency, dignity, and a sense of security that had been violently disrupted. Every brick laid, every coat of paint applied, carried with it the quiet assertion that their lives could not be defined by the audacity of one controlling neighbor. Even so, the narrative of Cedar Grove remained altered. The neighborhood that had once prided itself on conformity, appearance, and unyielding order now carried the memory of a house burned, a courtroom battle fought, and a community's trust tested. Residents spoke in hushed tones of Helen Whitaker's defeat, her unflinching resolve, and the lessons learned from witnessing the extremes of suburban authority. Cedar Grove would never again view the rules of an HOA as merely administrative. They had seen the human consequences of absolute power unchecked, and the story of the Morris family became the lens through which all future conflicts would be interpreted. In the end, justice had been partially served. The fire had destroyed a home, but could not extinguish the truth. The courtroom had delivered a verdict, but Helen Whitaker's appeal served as a stark reminder that power, cunning, and audacity do not disappear overnight. The Morris family emerged stronger, wiser, and acutely aware of the vigilance required to protect what they loved. They had confronted a force that few could imagine, survived the psychological and legal onslaught, and reclaimed not just their home, but their narrative. As night fell over Cedar Grove, the Morris family stood outside their newly rebuilt house, the structure glowing softly in the warm light of their restored property. The neighborhood had settled into a fragile calm, aware that the drama of months past would echo for years to come. And in the shadows, Helen Whitaker remained, a figure of both fascination and fear, her presence a reminder that in Cedar Grove, every small infraction, every perceived slight, and every spark of rebellion could ignite consequences that were as unpredictable as they were transformative. The fire had begun it all. The courtroom had carried it forward. And in the quiet aftermath, the Morris family realized a simple but profound truth. Some battles leave scars, some adversaries defy expectation, and some victories, however hard won, are only the beginning of the story.